Hiya! A while ago I had this idea of a purist customs for a Clone High CMF series, supposed to release this back when the reboot was starting to air. Things kinda happen, you change your mind on some scheduling, but here it is, an entirely purist micro CMF series all about your favorite historical figures and what they got up to when they were in high school. The figures that I'll be using here is everyone that you can currently see on screen. I tried to use as many common parts as I possibly could, wherever I could, but obviously some of those characters have very specific looks to them in the show, and in this video I do tragically have to use a lot of outdated figures that cost a pretty penny nowadays. If you enjoy this look at how you can build these Clone High figures, liking and subscribing does help to support this channel into making more videos like this. If you have any ideas on how to improve the figures, let me know in the comments below, I would really appreciate it. We start with Abe, essentially the series lead and the one that I was the most intrigued about making due to his proportions compared to everybody else. I said when I reviewed the LEGO Avatar line that Norm would be a really great useful minifigure, and here we are. I'm using Norm in his Avatar form, Brian O'Connor from the Fast and Furious Speed Champions line, Shaggy from the Scooby-Doo line, and Tony Stark from the Iron Man 3 Malibu Mansion. Only Tony Stark is using a re-released part, it's his hairpiece in case you weren't able to guess. I believe all of those other parts though are exclusive to these minifigures. I take Norm's legs but I leave his torso off to the side just for now. I add the Brian O'Connor torso, I remove all of those remaining Brian parts like his head and his arms, the arms I replace with Norm's, and I actually swap the hands between Norm and Brian. Next I add Shaggy's head, and finally I add Tony Stark's hairpiece. This is Abe, who utilizes the taller and longer parts very effectively. Abe in the show wears a t-shirt, which meant that sleeves on this minifigure would be a must. There are minifigures that exist that have blue shirted sleeves, like Finn from Adventure Time, but I really wanted to keep those long arms to help match those legs, because LEGO themselves regularly just print t-shirt sleeves as one full color. They skip the skin tone entirely, which I agree, it's very annoying, but it feels a bit more aligned with what the company themselves would make. I'm actually going to make the two complicated ones now, because the next two characters, they actually both borrow parts from the Trudy minifigure from the Avatar line. Joan was also a very important character that I wanted to have as a minifigure, and a really good representation for something that LEGO is greatly missing in their parts inventory. I am using Trudy from Avatar and her husband from Another Life, Dominic Toretto, from the Fast and Furious Speed Champions line. I'm using Elaine from Seinfeld and Dynamite from the LEGO Agents line. The most important parts here are all minifigure exclusive. I'm so sorry. I used Trudy's legs, Dom's chest, and I removed the Dominic Toretto parts. I give her Elaine's face and her arms. The final piece here is Dynamite's hairpiece, and that's my Joan of Ark. Joan is my favorite character from the show, so I really wanted to make sure that I got her correct, and I think with the limitation of parts that are accessible, I don't think she came out too bad. Where are the improvements to be made? Let's get into it. Joan's hair is a really cool but very specific design. There is no hairpiece that exists that matches this in my eyes, plus it's a 2D show, so it is really hard to grasp just what that would look like in a 3D realm. I think some of you would probably want to try maybe Tonk's hair from the Harry Potter line, but I really like the sharp shaping of the Dynamite hair, so that's why I chose to go with this one instead. LEGO do not enjoy printing tube tops for any of their female minifigures. There's definitely a reason behind this, we're not going to bother getting into that here. Sometimes they've made some exceptions, but I've tried making mini characters in the past and I just can't quite make them work because LEGO do not have these specific clothes made for minifigures. So ideally in the future, she would have something a bit more akin to what she's actually wearing in the show. Cleo is another ultra specific minifigure that I needed to make sure I got right, only because I knew that I actually did have that one defining piece needed to really sell her design. You know what piece it is. I'm using Hercules from the Disney CMF series, I'm using Cho Chang from the Harry Potter CMF series, a very incredibly useful minifigure. I'm once again using Trudy, but I'm using a different part, so I'm able to have both Cleo and Joan in the same line. And I have Valkyrie here from the Thor Love and Thunder and Endgame sets. I can't quite actually remember which one this one is, but her parts aren't exclusive, don't worry about it. I'm using Barbara Gordon from the LEGO Batman line. It's a character exclusive part, so it may or may not be available in other releases, and the Egyptian Queen from the CMF series, for obvious reasons. Yes, she is mostly made up of exclusive parts, I'm afraid. You can blame LEGO though, they really should make these more accessible in my eyes. I'm using Hercules' legs, and I'm adding Cho Chang's skirt piece. I add on Trudy for her torso, and I remove all of those Trudy extras, which again means that her legs can then be used for Joan. I add Valkyrie's arms, and because my Valkyrie has black gloves for her hands, I'm having to borrow some from Dean Thomas, or anyone else that matches that flesh tone. You should try and find a minifigure where you just have to swap the arms as a whole, not the arms and then the hands like a dummy like like me. Once all that's been sorted, I add Barbara Gordon's head, and finally, you guessed it, the Cleopatra hairpiece, because we all know that that's who this figure is supposed to be representing. Cleo here was a lot of fun to make, and I think she came out really well. I think her expression looks great, and the hairpiece naturally does work for her. I'm lucky that LEGO do sometimes do things like tank tops, and those designs can work for characters like this. Kennedy here was actually the first character that I had in mind when I was designing these. I thought he would be the one to really sell the series if I could get him looking right. I'm using Lex Luthor from the Batman vs Superman set, Peter Parker from the Daily Bugle, Bruce Wayne from the LEGO Batman movie Cave set, Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld, and the rugby player from the CMF series. From my research, I believe that the Bruce Wayne figure and the rugby player have exclusive rights to the parts that I'm using. I take the beige legs from Lex Luthor and I add that jacket from Peter Parker. I swap the heads over from Bruce Wayne and I give him Cosmo Kramer's hair. Finally, the rugby ball makes a really good substitute for the American football, and here is Kennedy. The expression was really important to try and capture, and there's not too many fun, goofy expressions with minifigures like this. LEGO have made footballers of all different varieties before, but that specific jacket for Kennedy is really hard to capture with the LEGO parts that I have on hand. I also think it's crazy that the rugby ball only exists in that format and not as an American football, which would have been more useful here. Scudworth is the eccentric antagonist of the series, and after creating the clones, he takes on the role of their school principal. I originally left him absent because I couldn't get a Mr. B to work, but I decided to give him a go anyway. I used the Crazy Scientist minifigure from the excellent horror CMF series, Homer Simpson, Dwight from The Office, and Vern from the Ninja Turtle set. Vern's parts are quite mass produced. I use the scientist's torso and legs, and I remove his head and his arms, and I replace those arms with Homer's. I give him Dwight's headpiece, and if you don't like that hairpiece used for Dwight, well, that's what that Vern figure is for. There are a lot of different ways that you could go about making a Scudworth, which is what drew me into making him overall, I think. There's all sorts of different lab coats and scientist torsos that are available, so whichever one you fancy and whichever one you have in your collection should work just fine. Again, a very expressive minifigure, but very few heads exist that actually capture that facial hair and those glasses. Gandhi was the character removed from the series as a whole, but he's pretty important and pretty integral for the show overall. I just didn't want to not include him. Plus, because of the parts that he uses, he contrasts really nicely with the others for being the only shorter figure of the roster. I'm using Branch from the Trolls LEGO sets, Daryl from The Office, Jim Gordon from the Batman movie CMF series, and Morris from the Lightyear sets. So I take Branch's dark blue legs, I add Daryl's torso, and I remove the arms and his head. I replace those arms with Jim Gordon's white sleeves, and then I add the Morris head. Remove that hairpiece, and now we have Gandhi. In the show, Gandhi has some really nice slicked red shoes, and his shirt was really important for details as well, a grey t-shirt with some red colouring. There is no part that exists that looks like this, so I had to go with something that was at least a little bit close. I opted in for at least using sleeves, because there were far too many minifigures where I had to make substitutes, because finding sleeves are a really hard piece. And obviously the facial hair is wrong as well, but that Morris head uses such a good facial expression, I just thought it was perfect for Gandhi. So if only LEGO could release a head that was this expressive on this same flesh tone without the facial hair. That's my official look at how I made some of the characters from Clone High in LEGO. There are always room for improvement amongst the designs, and there's always other figures that I've missed. It's always possible that LEGO will release some really great parts in the future that could always be used to improve your looks of custom figures. If you enjoyed this look at a custom minifigure series, liking and subscribing does help to support this channel in making more videos like this. Ka kite anō.